Parents who homeschool their children have expressed concerns about a new bill, which they say will take power over their children away and give it to the government. The Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill will create a register of every child who is homeschooled. It will also get parents to request permission from their local council if they want to homeschool a child who is considered to be at risk of harm. Ministers say this bill will protect children and prevent future cases, such as the murder of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif, who was killed by her father and stepmother after they took her out of school. But the businessman and well-known TikToker Simon Squibb has been speaking to ITV News. He said this bill gives the government all the power to decide what we do with our children and how, as parents, we must parent. It's an interesting story to talk about. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Ciaran Kelly from the Christian Institute. They've long campaigned against this idea of a homeschool register. Ciaran, first of all, thank you for being with us today.
Pleasure, James. Always good to be on TWR.
Why are you against the idea of the government having access to a list of all children who are being homeschooled in this nation?
Well, it's really important, James, that we start with the principle of what education is about. And the principle is that parents are responsible for their children's education. Some choose to home educate, many choose to use the state school system or private school system, but there are some who choose to home educate for all sorts of reasons. And the principle is really, really important, that because the duty of education, a God-given duty, and the legal duty rests with the parent, that those boundaries are respected. So that's why we've campaigned to say that there is a place for state schooling. Of course there is, but the responsibility exists with parents, and they choose to use the state school system if they so choose. But that decision is with them, and this cuts across that. And that's our concern, because it upends and this bill, the Children's Wellbeing and School Bill, which is the focus of the controversy, it risks upending this principle with this compulsory registration scheme. And just so people, it can kind of sound like you're just keeping a list of somebody's name, but I mean there's much more to it than that. The amount of detail that's going to be kept, or is proposed to be kept, on each child is incredible.
I've heard it said in the past that a homeschool register could lead to Ofsted-style inspections of what parents are teaching their children in the home. Is there any truth in that?
Well, I mean, there's already checks on home educators and what they're, there's examples of work that's being done and that sort of thing. So I think an Ofsted school inspection where there's is probably a bit far, but I wouldn't want to be too definitive on that. I think there is a very important thing that we do need to address, James, which you touched on in your introduction. And this really sends people down the wrong direction in terms of, I think, when they're thinking about this, because as the government has proposed, and as you laid out in your introduction, there was this horrendous example of the murder of Sarah Sharif that is being talked about. And that is being used as kind of the rallying cry for why home educators should be required to register their children, and there should be all this data that's held on those children. And Sarah Sharif, it's an absolute tragedy. Let's be absolutely clear about, utterly appalling. But to sort of tar home educators with the brush of their potential child abusers or even killers is an appalling thing to do. And Sarah Sharif was known to social services, and there was all sorts of indicators in place in the run up to her murder. So the failure wasn't a lack of data; it was a failure to act on the data that social services already had. And you can just imagine. I don't think it takes all that much effort to imagine that if you start adding masses more information into an already overworked system. And social workers, everybody knows that social workers are massively overworked. They've got their caseloads are far beyond what they can realistically deal with day to day. If you pile on more work into that mix, you're risking missing the children who really need to be looked after. And Sarah Sharif was missed, but it's nothing to do with the home educating system.
Some home educators who might be listening to this now might respond to that by saying that it's worth having a register if it prevents just one case like Sarah's. Is that not a valid point?
But no, I just think it's a misnomer, really, because there's no evidence that home educating is the cause for any of these kind of problems that the government are talking about trying to address. The reality here is that there's been a breakdown in family life over decades, which has left social services overworked. Home educators will tend to be parents who are want to bring their children out of school, perhaps for safeguarding reasons, perhaps because of bullying reasons, perhaps because of a particular religious belief. It's to sort of suggest that these are all perpetrators in waiting is just absolutely the wrong way to frame the whole argument. And if I can just come back to the point about data, because again, I think perhaps people have this idea in their minds. I mean, if you don't home educate, and I don't, you perhaps don't pay it an awful lot of attention. So you'd think, well, perhaps what is the big deal, really? But so let's be a little bit specific. It's not just kind of keeping track of somebody's name. They'd have to record, or the intention is to record the amount of time that each parent spends educating each child. So if you've got more than one child that you're home educating, data on all of that, and the names and addresses of any other individuals or organisations involved in providing that education, and the number of hours they provide for each child. Now let's think about what that means. Education is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. So itinerant music teachers, sports coaches, so anything which falls into the remit, the potential remit of education, you've got to keep data on all of that. That's going to have an awful impact on why would you provide that service to a child who's being home educated when it brings all these extra layers of bureaucracy. There's reports one wildlife trust has already stopped its provision for home educated children because of fears around this bill. That's a terrible place to be, that opportunities are being kept away from children because they are home educated. So, let's separate the two things. There is obvious issues around safeguarding that social services need to work on. Adding a load more children into the mix is going to create more issues. It's not going to solve any.
Just as a final question for you, and we have touched on this partly, but I think it's probably important just to emphasise it. There are many parents, as you've said in this interview, who decide to homeschool their children as a result of their Christian faith principle. Why do you think they should always have the right to do that?
Because parents have a God-given responsibility for their children. That's a point that we can talk about here. That wouldn't have traction with people in the secular world. But we need to acknowledge that is a God-given responsibility. You are responsible for your child. I'm responsible for my child with my wife. And this is it's remarkably intrusive. This is the state taking on a responsibility. I mean, if you sort of think back, we did a load of work on what's called the named person in Scotland, and had to take the Scottish government to court. Nicola Sturgeon, who was First Minister at the time, talked about herself as chief mammy. The idea that parents are secondary to the state, and that's not true. The parents have the God-given responsibility, and we need to uphold for their children, and we need to uphold that principle. We had a legal opinion from Aidan O'Neill Casey, highly respected human rights lawyer, and he talked about he used language like this being remarkably intrusive, talked about parents being put into this suspect category. We need to stand stand up for the principle that it is parents who are responsible for the education of their children, not the state. Even though we might, if you like, delegate that responsibility to the state in some cases, but we need to stand up for that principle. It's really important.
Ciaran Kelly from the Christian Institute, thank you very much for joining us on the programme today.
Thanks, James.